Good evening, everyone. And John? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting for June 2025. Fire alarm procedures are as follows. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase, opposite the lifts in the foyer. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst this meeting is in progress. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? That's a no, and we've got no members of the public, so we'll move on. I've got one request to speak under 20.1, and that's from Councillor Rogers. No request for public speaking, and so I'll move on to item number 1, which is the apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Packman and Councillor Moore. Any other apologies? Okay, moving on to item 2, the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? That's a no. Moving on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2025. To approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 20th of May 2025. A copy is attached to the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Green and a seconder, Councillor Austin. All members agree? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 4, which is the review of the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme for 2025-26. Okay, so the members have now been identified to establish the next working party for the next scrutiny review, which is going to be led by Councillor Green. The first meeting is due next week. That's right, and that will be down to narrow down the topic. Did Councillor Green want to say anything on that?
Sorry, just to thank the people that have put their name forward. There's a nice little group there, and I've circulated some notes to hopefully help us come to a conclusion about how we can best spend our time.
Excellent, thanks David. Yeah, so by the time we come back next month we were well underway, I should hope, and we thank members that have been co-opted because there are members from outside this panel that are actually going to be on that scrutiny review. Have members got any questions or comments they want to make on the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme? Nope. Councillor Davis.
Simply to note that looking at our forward work programme at this stage of the meeting precludes any inclusion at this point of discussion about matters that may come up as a result of the reports, and we've got some important reports this evening, so I think it may be something that the committee ought to discuss after those reports rather than before, because our opinion on what needs to be looked at may be informed by that.
Okay, I don't really want to come back to the agenda items. I mean, is there something you want to expand on now, or do you want to leave it to the next meeting?
No, I'm just conscious that there are matters been raised by members of the public and things to do with these reports that we need to discuss. So what I didn't want was to leave it and then not have it on the work, agreed to be on the work agenda or assessed. But I can quite happily bring it through subsequent to the meeting if necessary.
Yeah, just send me an email, Councillor Davis.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions or comments? No? Okay, moving on to item number 5, which is the Tenant Leaseholder Service KPI Q4 Housing Performance Report. So I'll call on Sally O'Sullivan to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you. So presented tonight are the performance KPIs for Q4. I'm just going to give a couple of highlights from the report. So our contractor performance remained really strong during Q4, and this is a time when demand significantly increases due to weather conditions. The arrears performance continues to steadily improve and has ended the financial year at 2.61. And capital expenditure ended the financial year by spending 98.7% of our capital budget. There are 3 capital projects that have been delayed, and this has included delays to the Tower Blocks retrofit and refurbishment project, which obviously is a significant underspend on that one, and that budget has been moved into this financial year now. The compliance performance is still strong and gas safety remains at 100%, and compliance in Q4 with electrical safety has increased to 98.57. We do continue to monitor our fire risk assessment actions as these have been an area of concern. And during Q4, they increased by 158 new actions because we completed 25 new FRAs, and we closed out 355 actions. I think that's all of the highlights I'll give for the time being, but if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Sally. Members, any questions or comments you'd like to make? Oof, it's a warm evening. Councillor Austin.
I just want to say I think it's looking good. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Wing?
Sally kindly has offered myself and Tricia a meeting because we are fielding quite a lot of call for information and concerns from the Harbour Towers residents, which we're quite happy to do because we live in the ward. But so thank you for offering us a meeting, and we'll arrange that after our meeting with residents on Friday. Thanks.
Anybody else? So, Councillor Davis.
Simply to note the quality of the feedback again. Ms O'Sullivan's reportage gives us a very good picture of where we are, highlights any areas of concern, and I don't think there are any, so I just wanted to record that. Sorry. Did you want me to say that again? If that's better, I was simply putting on the record again, as I did at the briefing, that Sally O'Sullivan's department again give us good information in an understandable format, and I just wanted to recognise that and to encourage all departments to go over to dashboards in the same concise way of letting us know what's going on, because it does enable us to identify any areas quite quickly. But I'm pleased to say we haven't. So.
Excellent. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I echo sort of the comments that made by people, but I had a question around the tower block retrofit, and particularly the fire safety side of it. We've had a number of comments, I think, over the past couple of years of how much the residents have valued the Waking Watch, but obviously that comes at a massive financial cost. Has there much discussion and planning gone into how that's going to be communicated to residents when that's ultimately going to have to drop off, and the relevant sort of fire safety precautions and changes are brought in? Because I think there will be obviously quite a sudden change for there being people there all the time, which is helping with things like antisocial behaviour, suddenly then not being there. I'm sure the council's thought about it. I'd just be interested in hearing a bit more about some of those plans.
Chair, if I may, I'll respond to that. At this stage, we haven't got any firm plans about what to do following the stand down of the Waking Watch. Obviously, the Waking Watch is there for a very specific purpose to do with fire safety. When that is no longer required, we will need to take a view about what to do next. I think we're very aware that residents have benefited in lots of other ways from having on-site presence throughout that period. And I know I have spoken to the Cabinet Member for Housing about that issue. I think, and we would like to explore how we might provide some form of ongoing support for residents. It won't be able to be a continued 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service just because of the cost of that and the other pressures on the business plan. But I think we'd be anxious not to see a complete cliff edge of the service falling away.
Councillor Davis.
I'm glad to hear you mentioned about the reviewing the period, because one question, and it sounds flippant but isn't, was why the Waking Watch are there during the day, because I understood it was against fire safety considerations and so on with the existing building format. But given that people are up and active during the day, I wondered why we found it necessary just to have a Waking Watch during the day and not through those slumber hours.
That could be quite a long answer. I can give you headlines, but I'm more than happy to talk through the fire safety arrangements with with you or any other members at any point if that's necessary. The headline answer is that the fire service very specifically require us, whilst there are issues that need mitigating in those buildings, to have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week Waking Watch. The word waking is probably a little bit of a misnomer. It's not there to wake people up. It's there to alert people in the event of a fire, whatever time of day or night that might be, and to help organise an effective evacuation.
Thanks, Bob. And again, if it's a requirement of the fire brigade, then obviously there's normally very good reasons for that. So, thank you.
Councillor Wing.
Okay, Bob, can you just confirm, so the Waking Watch will be in place until the refurbishments are complete?
Well, to be precise, they'll be in place until the fire service say we can stand them down. There are a couple of significant risk issues that are being mitigated by the Waking Watch. So the first is the presence of the external wall treatments that do need to be removed. And the second key risk issue relates to the ventilation shafts in the building. So once those two risks have been resolved as a result of the refurbishment project, the fire service would then review the fire strategy with us, and well, our anticipation is that they would allow us to step it down at that point.
Are we all done? Okay, so we're just asked to note the report on that one. Are we all happy to note that report? Okay, excellent. Moving on to item number 6. Okay, so the Port of Ramsgate Future Delivery Project. So I call on Mr. Humber to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides a comprehensive update on the Port Future Delivery Project following the procurement process to secure a concession operator being abandoned at the end of January this year. The report includes a recommendation that will be made to Cabinet on the 26th of June to formally end previously approved plans to implement a concession port operator model. A further recommendation proposes that new options for a sustainable solution for the port are developed for consideration by Cabinet in the autumn. The report describes the reason for not being able to award a concession contract from the procurement process that started last August. As a reminder, this was for a 20 plus 5-year concession to operate 18 acres of the port, including the 2 roll-on, roll-off ferry berths. An award would have been accompanied by a £4.5 million grant and a commitment by the council to undertake the required dredging with a cost of circa £2.5 million. All of that would have been funded from the Ramsgate Pathfinder programme. However, the estimated costs of the work to make the port ready had risen to about £17 million, and there's more detail in the report on that. From engagement through that procurement process, we know that it was the financial gap, which is about 10.3 million, between the works cost and the grant that has stopped us from progressing to a concession contract award. The report also describes the rationale for reallocating 7.6 million of the Ramsgate Pathfinder funding away from the Port Future Delivery Project due to the deadline for spending that funding, and that recommendation is set out in a separate report to Cabinet on the 26th of June, and reallocating that funding is now essential in order to retain it and deliver valuable local outputs via other existing projects. I think since the end of January, officers have explored options and pursued opportunities to enable the approved concession contract route to be progressed and delivered. This includes seeking additional funding from government to allow the grant value to be increased and facilitate a second concession procurement process. Other options for sourcing the required funding, including borrowing and grants, have also been explored. The option of directly awarding a contract on the same terms as offered under the procurement process have also been pursued, with some negotiation taking place with the Port of Dover on that subject, and the report talks more about that. The report also talks about a new challenge relating to the port access tunnel. And now this is a public highway and it's a KCC asset that needs about £6 million worth of work in order to make it compliant with modern standards. The opportunities explored since January have not enabled progression towards the retendering of the concession contract or a direct contract award. There is now a significant time pressure associated with the 7.6 million port infrastructure project budget, which is part of that Ramsgate Pathfinder programme. And without a viable way forward now for the approved concession model, that funding is at risk, hence the proposed reallocation of funds, which is covered separately on the agenda this evening. It's important to highlight that there is no do-nothing option for the Port of Ramsgate. The strategic objectives for the port have not changed. A solution to the long-term revenue deficit position is required, along with a sustainable solution for the port in the long term. The strategic advantages offered by the port have also not changed in terms of the port's geographical location, its road connectivity and the short sea crossing advantages that it offers. Now, these advantages have been recognised by the Port of Dover, and a letter highlighting this is included in Appendix 2 of the report. One of the proposed recommendations, Recommendation 2, it will mean that we formally move away from that concession port operator model that was approved by Cabinet in 2023. If approved, Recommendation 3 will also direct officers to develop a schedule of high-level strategic options for the future of the port. A non-exhaustive list of options are contained in Table 3 of the report, and they include things like long lease options, freehold disposal, master planning for non-port related uses, and development of a new business case in order to bid for future funds and retain the port for cross-channel freight purposes. It is proposed that these options will be developed and brought back to Cabinet in the autumn. There has been, really a great deal of work done to deliver on the Cabinet decision to implement a port concession model. However, following the procurement exercise and the work since then, and given the deadline and the requirements of the Pathfinder funding, recommendations are now being made to Cabinet later this month in order to ensure that that funding delivers local outputs, and to direct officers to move away from the concession model and focus on future options to deliver a sustainable solution for the port. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so I presume we've all read the report, 24 pages long, and we did have a very long briefing last week about it too. I'm just going to ask Councillor Rogers, you did indicate that you wanted to speak. Did you still want to? You do. I'll come to you first.
Thank you. This port I don't think is ever going to be a successful operation. If it was financially viable, the ferry operators would still be there. The financial outlay is huge and continuing. Surely this money could be used for far more enterprising projects. So much money so far has been wasted. There's more money to be spent on the berths. Are we going to continue with this cost to these berths? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Well, so this report proposes moving the money away from this. So in answer, it won't be spent on pursuing a new concession operator. The 7.6 million this report is proposing to reallocate it to other projects. So it is doing what you've just said and moving the money away. I mean, in terms of, we know the port needs investment, and I think that has been a key issue as to why a concession operator hasn't been attracted. There is a very clear steer from the market that there is a need for the port. We know that freight, we know that there's growth in the freight market, and there will continue to be growth, and that freight needs resilience. And so there are some key things that haven't changed in terms of the port and its offering, but the purpose of this report is to move away from that concession and look at options again, so that we can bring those back to Cabinet and see what is the best sustainable option to resolve the deficit. Just coming back to, there isn't a do-nothing option, and that's because every year the port is costing, there's a revenue deficit position. So we have to do something to resolve that. The concession option was assessed to be the best option to deliver that. We've tried that. It hasn't worked, and that's because of the financial gap between what we could offer and the cost of doing the works at the port. So now is the right time. We've got the pressure on the budget. It's the right time to go away and look at those options and come back to Cabinet with those.
Thanks, Mike. So we've got Councillor Scobie, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Davis the first thing.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a really comprehensive report, and it's clear that no stone has gone unturned to try and look for various options around this. And I think just listening to Councillor Rogers' point and the sort of answer around, can this port ever be viable? For me, reading the report and understanding a bit more about the history, this is less to do whether the port's viable, it's whether we as a district council have the financial resources to be able to invest consistently. And we have been left with an issue now when actually this has been years of underinvestment. And I think that's the real sort of nub of this. I genuinely believe that Ramsgate is viable. And I think there are, the letter from Dover Port clearly shows that there is interest. And I think some of the discussions that we've had with government show that there are views around how viable that is from a strategic perspective for the country. But the fact that we and the resources we've got available cannot invest in that is, for me, the fundamental issue. But I think we do need to reflect on the last few years and question, was it the right decision to go down this path? And for me, I think it was. I think we had a one-off opportunity where the government was allowing us to bid for large amounts of funding, which we wouldn't have got for other projects and we wouldn't have got in other ways. And the port is clearly one of Ramsgate's biggest assets. And I think some of the issues that we've had to deal with in the last couple of years go down to, I think, the bidding process from before, where bids had to be put in at haste. Proper work was not allowed to be put into it because it was, unlike government funding in the past, these large amounts of money were given out on the basis of very sort of high-level options. So I think it was the right decision to try this. My question for you, Mr. Humber, was just around a lot of the issues that are raised in the report and talk about how options could be going forward. To me, may change in a couple of years' time, because even though we don't know what local government reorganisation looks like, there's a very high likelihood that we could be included, certainly with Dover, and potentially with Folkestone as well, in a unitary council that will have a completely different budgetary model. And so my question was, like, even though we may have our views on what should happen to the port now, I know there's some suggestion from people that there should be housing put on the port instead, which seems slightly ludicrous to me, but my question would be, is the best option not for us to park the situation now that we've lost this opportunity with the external funding because the time has gone down, see what comes out of local government, and then potentially the question of how we link up with Dover may in fact be solved because we may be in the same council authority.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Scobie. So I think the concern is, or the issue that we are presented with, is that we don't have an operator, we don't have the income to be able to maintain what's there. We have an open port duty, which means that we have to accept trade. That's under the 1847 Act that says that it's open and we have to accept ship passenger and goods that that want to go through the port. But at the moment, we don't have the income to be able to service those berths and sustain them. Now, that's a risk, along with the fact that the port year on year is making a deficit. The berths themselves are floating structure. They're big floating pontoons with a large bridge that connects them to the shore, and that has to move with the tidal range. So it needs constant maintenance. There isn't we can't mothball effectively and say we'll just leave everything. So I think the answer is it will continue to cost money until we find a solution, and there continues to be a risk because we are not able to be compliant with the open port duty because of the lack of income to be able to manage the estate in the way that it should be managed. So I think it comes back to that no do nothing. I think we have to progress and find a solution to it. It may well be that local government reorganisation changes moves the goalposts or changes the way that we approach it. But now I think there isn't an option to just do nothing at the moment.
So I mean, I have no doubt the debate we're about to hear from members. There's lots of people that know a lot about the port and feel very strongly about it. But just to be really, really clear here, the report we're looking at is giving the options on the current situation and what we could do. But the parameter of that is we don't have the money to invest fully in the infrastructure and to reopen it in the way we wanted. there are significant costs related to closing the port and trying to do something differently, and we could be talking about years ahead with that. And so therefore we're in a position of trying to make do with what we can with the resources and see if we can come up with other options. Because I think that's an important point, because we could spend a lot of time debating tonight our views of what could happen to the port and could it be this, could it be that, but the reality is that's not the situation we're in. We have parameters on us, which is we don't have the money to invest, we can't simply close it, so we're restricted to what's in the report. Is that a fair summary of some of your points?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I think coming back to that open port duty, and if we want to change that through a harbour revision order or a harbour closure order, those processes can take up to 5 years. We think it probably takes about 4 years at the moment, so that's a considerable length of time and quite a process involved in that. The options in the report are, at the moment, that they are described very briefly, but the purpose of the recommendation is to scope those so that we do some economic analysis behind those, and then bring that back to Cabinet so that we can propose a list of options or a sustainable option for Cabinet's approval. But there isn't any option where we can be relieved of the open port duty responsibility, solve the revenue deficit position without it costing money. So that's why we need to look at these and find the most sustainable, the best option that to take things forward.
David.
Yeah, I'd just like to start by thanking the officers for the considerable amount of work that I know has gone into examining our options in great detail. I'd like to remind councillors that what we're being asked in this report to focus on, and that is whether the option that we've been pursuing, that of a concession, is viable. And it's obvious to me from the report that it's not viable and that we need to do something different. But it was worth trying, I think. And I was really quite impressed by the letter from Dover, because it put to rest some of my concerns about whether there was an option for a ferry at the port. If Dover thinks there is, or was, then I'm quite happy to go along with their expertise. But the option of using the levelling up money to facilitate action now obviously isn't enough to make it work, and TDC obviously is not big enough, not wealthy enough to provide the money to make it work. So I think what is being suggested here, and I ask councillors to focus on what is being suggested here, is that we withdraw the money and use it elsewhere in the other Ramsgate schemes, which I'm quite content with. I think it'll make the other Ramsgate schemes that much more viable, so that they will be something that we can be proud of, rather than something that is struggling against what is happening to all these sorts of schemes, which is being overtaken by inflation and building costs, etc. So I'm looking forward to the new scenario. This is not about the future of the port, that will come later. It's not about the history of the port, which there's nothing we can do about it, but it's about this particular project, whether it's viable or not, and what we should do about it. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Probably quite surprisingly to some in the room, I'm going to reiterate some of what my colleagues have said. And there was a phenomenal amount of work and a lot of work being done. And I want to make it quite clear that we are not a political committee, but we are here to critique. We are here to critique the actions of a policy. And it is important that everybody remembers that when we are criticising that process and where we are, it is not about an individual. Because recently, those of us who have challenged and scrutinised things get feedback saying, oh, well, you mustn't. No, we must say that, because clearly this is a flawed policy. It has been flawed not under just this administration, under those foolish enough to buy into it under the previous administration. So this is an apolitical, not a non-political comment. There are matters that we would like to raise, but they are for another discussion. In that we are here specifically about the question of viring money that we have spent quite a lot of our time as well as officer time viring and agreeing to it being vired from one project to another. Now it's bouncing back again. Let's not get into the whys and the wherefores of that at this point. And I think any of us will be pleased to see the money producing an outcome and being used positively. But what does need to go on the record is that this business of pursuing the dead parrot that is the port, all the levelling up money has done is allowed for matinee repeat runs of the same boring sketch. The port is not viable for ferries. We have a lovely letter from Dover, who are very keen on Ramsgate until it comes to putting their hand in their pocket, because they have just spent millions improving all of their facilities and doing exactly what should have been done at Ramsgate, enhancing the side of the port and harbour that makes money, which is the harbour. It's now losing money because it's being sucked down the same vortex of losses. And I want to save us some money here potentially by throwing into the mix information about the much vaunted open port duty. Because the wonderful news I have for this council is we do not need to be spending fortunes in order to be an open port. The open port duty, if we check the law, and I have got a document that was forwarded to me confirming which section of law it says, but in essence, the open port duty only applies to the natural condition of the port. So if the port is silted up and there's only 1 metre of water available, that's the size of ship that we have a duty to accommodate. You do not need to dredge in order to maintain an open port duty. The same as if the river mouth silts up, Sandwich won't have a duty to dredge the river mouth to keep their port open. No, in any case, the open port duty is only to the extent that there is a natural facility or that the facility is available. Therefore, we don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds dredging for fantasy ferries that may as well be sailing in with Captain Jack Sparrow on board. There are no ferries that fit. We had mention of freight vessels earlier. So we're now sliding again from the ferry fantasy across to filthy, out of date, other people's rejects. That's what we're looking at. If Dover was so keen, they would be using it now. If other operators were so keen, 11 years since that port failed with Trans-Europa, or Trans-Europa did the runner. Given that they hadn't paid us for 3 years before that, this is 14 years of millions of pounds of losses. Can I please implore that we recommend to our Cabinet the need for all options to go back on the table. Not preferred options. People know my position on this, and I know what I believe is a preferred option, but I'm not predetermining anything. What has to happen here, particularly after the farce of year after year after year after year of hitting the parrot, this isn't dead. Well, yes, it is. So we need all options on the table and a deep breath. And if that means that, because the port clearly isn't going to get levelling up money, so let's take a breather and let's have some proper consultation. Let's follow what WPS and Infrata said, who were paid vast sums of money by this authority for advice. And both those reports say all options on the table. There were £500 million available for a complete rethink of the port several years ago. Those people are likely to come back. There's 25 million for other facilities. Let's look at all options, including the private sector. And can we please look at a recommendation that is done by Cabinet rather than just going down what 1 or 2 people think is a preferred route. We need public consultation and it all back on the table in a transparent manner. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think recommendation 3 does say that the office is going to go away and come back with a high-level strategic plan for options for the future of the port. So hopefully that's what we're going to hear.
But what I'm saying is that high-level strategic plan has to be developed in consultation with people that have got the professional knowledge and everything, rather than it just being a few thoughts internally. Because... Beg your pardon? Big pardon?
I was saying, you turn up and say, oh, I've had an email from somebody and I've looked at the port duty and we don't have to do it, and yet we've got our council's officers here who have got years of experience doing this saying the opposite, and you're saying that if they go away and come up with recommendations that they're going to miss something. I trust our officers. I trust our officers much more than people emailing you on the fly and you having a look at it. With the years of experience we've got here actually managing this, I trust them.
I'm not going to divulge the identities of those working on a panel that have emailed me with this information. However, I can assure you that they are extremely experienced, and I believe other councillors have had that email. I'm surprised you haven't, Councillor Scobie. Possibly you were included on it. However, it is a very real concern, and the evidence is there. So rather than us just having a love-in over who likes who, let's look at the facts. If I was to be proven wrong on that, I will quite happily sit here and say, OK, we misinterpreted it. But I can tell you that that's the case.
Councillor Wing.
Yeah, firstly, can we make sure... I could, you know, everybody knows my feelings on this, and I don't think going over old ground is going to help anybody at all. I don't think we should dismiss experts out in our communities either, because we have some incredibly talented maritime experts living in Thanet. So I don't think we should be dismissive of those people. But I think what we've done here, and I voted for this process, you know, my head voted for this process, my heart said we're never going to get a ferry. But I do believe it was important to go through this process, because we needed a properly organised process that would identify once and for all whether the port is viable as a ferry port going forward. And I think the letter from Dover actually sort of suggests that it is viable if you've got a big wallet and an extremely large amount of money to spend on the port. Dover don't have that money at the moment because they've got other commitments, and we don't have that money. So now it is time, and I'm not going to bang on about what's gone on in the past. Now it is time to have that alternative approach to things, and all I've got in front of me is the recommendations, because that's all we need to concentrate on. But I think what we've got to make sure going forward, we have to ensure that the worst case scenario for the port is it wipes its nose. The best case scenario for the port is it actually makes some money that we can plough back into all of our communities. What we don't want to do is we can't sustain a situation where the port and harbour together lose money. So that should be at the forefront of whatever recommendation we take going forward, and whatever we look at going forward for whatever happens on the report, although I won't be supporting nuclear waste coming in. So with that, I think it's really important for us to understand what the situation is in the port. So and I do think the open port thing is, there might be natural things happening. We know we get more northeasterly winds now, so actually the environment around the port is changing. Maybe we need to look at the environment around the port, because a lot of people who are maritime experts believe that the port is in the wrong place now in terms of the main flows, the main winds coming in and therefore silting. So I think the starting point would be, what are our costs annually to keep the port open, and what are our annual costs to keep it open with our open port duty, and how can is there anything we can do to navigate around the open port duty? So I think they are fundamental questions that need to be asked going forward, and it looks as if maybe recommendation 3 is the one I would be looking at, but they're the key things for me. The port has got to make money, or at least wipe its nose. Then we need to have a clear idea of exactly what the income and expenditure is, particularly around dredging, because what's the point of dredging if we don't actually have that many vessels, large vessels visiting? Are we dredging to depths that we don't need when we've got smaller vessels coming in, with the exception of the Brett's vessels? So those are some of the questions that are now sort of foremost in my mind. But I would like to thank Mike and his team, because I think it's probably taken you such a lot of hard work and a determination to get us to this point. You know, and I could have said, yeah, I knew we were going to get to this point, but it needs to be properly evidenced, and what you've done is properly evidence that. You know, anybody can stand up here and say we're never going to get a ferry, but you need to actually provide the evidence that says yes or no. And clearly there is some evidence that would suggest we are capable of having a ferry if we can win the lottery on Friday. Thank you.
I think it's important to say that the officers were given the political will by both the Conservatives and both Labour Group to go away and examine this, and we were behind them. And I think it was nearly unanimous in this chamber.
It was a politically motivated decision to pursue
it's
this.
Everybody on this council.
Although I think I voted against it.
Well, we dream of dancing to France one day, but it's never going to happen, I don't think. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just respond to Councillor Wing and also to Councillor Davis, if that's okay. So, on the point about what it costs, the harbour and the port are there are separate accounts produced for them, and those annual accounts show what the the income and expenditure is, and that's what I've sort of referred to earlier about the deficit, because at the moment, and there's Appendix 1 to this provides a bit of information about that in terms of how the port performs, how the harbour performs, and how they perform together. The harbour generates a modest surplus, generally speaking. The port, since 2013, has not. It's had periods where there's been quite a significant deficit because of one-offs, but generally there is a deficit between income and expenditure. You've mentioned about dredging, and the policy has been for some time that we dredge for the berths for where there is custom. So, as you mentioned, Brett's, and I bought a report last year about increasing the revenue budget for dredging because we needed to do a lot of work in the turning circle and for the Brett's berth, and some work in the Royal Harbour as well. But that was because the revenue budget wasn't sufficient, so we bought a report. We increased the budget so that we could do the dredging we needed to do. That dredging didn't focus on berths 2 and 3 because there isn't any business there at the moment. So we are being as efficient as possible in terms of dredging, and doing the areas that we need to do to maintain the business and the those that are using the port at the moment. Just coming back on the open port duty, so Thanet is a statutory harbour authority. So that means the council has, as a statutory harbour authority, it has powers. So powers to charge fees for the harbour and things like that, but it's also subject to duties, and I mentioned about that open port duty, and that comes from the Harbour Docks and Piers Clauses Act 1847, so really old piece of legislation that says upon the payment of rates, the harbour, dock and pier shall be open to all persons for the shipping and unshipping of goods, and that's based on the infrastructure that we have in place. Now, as I've sort of highlighted, we can't comply with that duty without income to maintain and operate the berths, and that's where if we wanted to relieve that duty, then that's where the harbour revision order process comes in. And this information, this is obviously we're working with lawyers, port specialist lawyers on this work, and and they're advising us and have done throughout this process in terms of that procurement, but also the port law that's specific to Ramsgate. There are 2 local pieces of legislation, the Ramsgate Corporation Act 1934 and the Ramsgate Harbour Revision Order 1979. Those 2 things linked together are what sets the the local statute, the local law for the port, and those combined with the 1847 Act and the Harbour Act 1964, those things all together are what gives what provides us with the mechanism to charge fees to maintain the port, but also the duties that we have to maintain it.
I mean, I just really wanted to reiterate what Mike says. Although the team have been advised by Port Marine specialists, I've obviously also been involved, and it is the case that the Harbour Docks and Piers Act 1847 provides for the open port duty, which means that we have to keep the harbour open upon payment of rates for the shipping and unshipping of goods, and also that there's a common law duty for us to ensure the that those that choose to navigate the port do so safely. We're also bound by legislation, by the Port Marine Safety Code, and that was referenced in the Port Governance Report. And we've got all sorts of duties. We're legally obliged to adhere to that, and there's all sorts of duties in relation to safety, both for passengers and freight in that regard as well. So really just to support what Mike was saying.
Can I come back then? Okay.
Councillor Austin.
Can I just seek a bit of clarification there then? So are we saying that it is possible, for example, that having a problem with the harbour, the area silting up, would be a justification to apply to put this duty on one side, but we'd still have to go through that process? Is that our understanding of where we are with that?
So no, it's not about it silting up, because of course we can resolve that by investing in dredging. It's about if we don't think that there is an investable proposition to maintain the berths, which means having a customer who's going to use the berths, pay ship, passenger and goods dues, which then the Harbour Authority, Statutory Harbour Authority uses to maintain. If that sort of circular process isn't there, then that's part of the justification for a harbour revision order. And that process, once you start it, there's a lot of consultation with existing customers and stakeholders around effectively changing the statute. And we've already got a harbour revision order from 1979 that conveys the powers and duties from the Royal Harbour to the port, because that's when the port was built. So we'd end up with another that changes the powers and duties that we have now to remove them from the berths.
I didn't want to lose sight of the situation regarding the tunnel. The news that it's going to require the order of 6 million to make it functional, clearly KCC's responsibility, but from Ramsgate's point of view, vital if we're going to get any traffic through the port at all, including the breadth traffic. And if the powers that be are thinking that the gravel for the monstrosity they're planning on Minster Marshes is going to come through Ramsgate Port, then that tunnel is absolutely vital.
Did you want to come back on the port road?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fairly new risk. We weren't aware of this when we went out to tender last year, but we have been since sort of the beginning of the year through discussion with KCC. The 6 million is a high level. It's an early estimate, so that could change. That's about the tunnel itself, and what KCC are saying is that to be able to handle the volume of freight that we're talking about from a cross-channel service, it needs that investment to make it compliant with modern standards. So I think whatever the solution is for the port, whatever sustainable solution we find, it needs access via that tunnel. Go back to before that tunnel was there, all freight and all traffic went along Military Road and through the town. That is entirely unsustainable. That's not something that we can go back to. So whatever that piece of land that the port becomes in the future, whether that's port related or something else, the tunnel is an important part, and it needs to be maintained to provide access.
So how long will that tunnel last, considering the breadth traffic that goes through that? So obviously it's going to take the volume of the ferry terminal back. Obviously it's a lot less with breadth. So how long before it's going to need that work with the breadth use that breadths get with it?
I think, to be honest, these are questions for KCC, not for us. We've through liaison, we've presented with this issue that there's about £6 million worth of investment required to maintain the tunnel. I think going into more detail than that now is difficult for us, as we're not the highway authority.
Is it the fact that they're just not going to spend it? It's not going to happen. They will close that road if it needs to be.
So it's not budgeted currently. So KCC haven't budgeted for any work to the tunnel currently.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Do we know what they're claiming the 6 million is for, Mike, in terms of actual works? Because it seems, I said this last week, it seems ludicrous that we've got all of this work going on and we're lauding the amount of work that you guys have done and so on, and along come KCC with this. I mean, it really is farcical because they don't come to Joint Transportation Board. You know, somebody is in breach of their duty to collaborate here between the councils. And there is a duty to collaborate and comply. And to have a curveball like this that really throws so much up in the air just isn't acceptable. And I think, can we make a recommendation that Cabinet demand some answers from KCC on this? Because otherwise we're just in their hands. They choose not to turn up because it doesn't suit them and nobody gets anything done. And it's our residents that are suffering because of this. Absolutely. Because this farce has gone on for 11 years, millions and millions and millions of pounds. 10 years ago, we were on the television talking about the black hole and the whirlpool, and here we are. It's like Groundhog Day.
We'll come to recommendations shortly. Councillor Scudder.
Well, two things. Again, I made the comment before, but I want to come back to it. I feel like we're sort of having a discussion around, well, KCC haven't budgeted for it. KCC might not exist in 3 years. Like, you know, we're talking about whether we as an authority might have plans for this in 4 years of closing it. We might not exist in 2 or 3 years. Like, the reality is we may find out at the end of this year we may find more information at the end of this year or early next year on what the future of our 2 authorities look like. It's the idea of collaboration between 2 tiers of council and what are the priorities for a new authority. We just don't know. So I completely support the recommendations. I think it would be good to get a view on what options are going forwards. And as I said earlier, I think we're going to find, as we as councillors learn more about this, we'll understand the operating environment officers are walking in, which is there isn't an easy option here. We're incredibly boxed in with costs all over the place, and we can't just like push a magic wand and say, oh, we're going to come up with a new solution, because it all comes down to money. If you're interested in recommendations, Chair, I was just going to move the recommendations in the report as written.
Is there anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? No. I mean, I've had an email as well, I don't know if it's the same people, from the Ramsgate Regeneration Alliance. I don't know who they are. They've just asked me to, not really questions or just comments really, about the open port status. It's been claimed that the obligation of the open port status will inhibit non-industrial development and therefore ferry operation must remain under consideration. It says that their research doesn't support that claim and they're happy to discuss their evidence with you. That's not really a question, but that's just what they're saying. Next one is the failure of the ferry initiative raises the opportunity to revisit potential mixed developments whilst retaining existing operations of the port and harbour, which is not prevented by the open harbour obligations, but has some specific and definable obligations. However, the amendment of the local plan referencing a ferry service should be considered. Just wanted to, I was asked to make those comments, and I'm not sure if you want to come back on those, but they don't really make sense to me.
I mean, I can only to say, I think that the options, which is a non-exhaustive list of options in the report, I mean, we'll look at those. So you mentioned about master planning. I think, well, that's in the report. And the elements of the open port duty and how that would change, the legislative requirements for change of that is in the report. I think the point of the options is to take a fresh look, but it's got to be viable. It's got to be, it's got to be sustainable and viable, and it's got to solve those things. It's got to solve the deficit position. We want a solution that doesn't cost this council huge amounts of money, and we want a solution that is sustainable in the long term. So those are the things, and those options, whatever they may be, are looking to deliver something that fits all those things.
Sure, yeah, I'm looking at table 2 in the report. The plan C is alternative uses of the site which are not commercial port related. So it was quite clear from about 5 months ago that the ferries are not going to come back, and you're saying it's not a do nothing situation. So what other ideas have you come up with in the last 5 months? Because you're going to bring the report back in the next 3 or 4 months, apparently. So what other ideas have you come up with in the last 5 months that possibly could go forward on that report?
So the focus over the last, well, since January, has been very much about trying to bridge the funding gap so that we can deliver the concession operation, which is the direction from Cabinet. So we had a failed procurement process, but we were still trying to deliver that. And the reason for that is because all the work that we've done about what's the best option pointed towards the concession operation in terms, and that's about what's got the least sort of commercial and regulatory risk and operational risk for the councils. That concession option, with the work that we've done with independent specialists, that's the best option. And we looked at other options at the time, which was all in the Cabinet report in March 2023. So that has been the main focus. What this report is proposing is we look at those options going forward, and it lists out the type of options, which could be a complete freehold disposal. So the council no longer having an interest in the port estate, or it could be a very long lease with conditions that say it has to stay as a port of some sort, or without conditions, so it could be something else. There are several options in there. Longer term concession where it's not bound by that 25-year term, joint venture, master planning, which might ultimately end up with a change in the local plan policy and other uses for the port, or looking at the business case for cross-channel again and reviewing or rewriting that business case with a view to attracting more grant funding. So these are all options that need to be reviewed, developed, scored, and brought back to Cabinet.
Councillor Wing.
I mean, it seems to me we need to look at all options, and the next item is going to be about the Green Campus. So, and I believe we have a shortage of industrial space in Thanet because some of it's being redeveloped for other uses. A lot of it is if you look at the Pisons estate, it needs updating massively. So, I think we've also got to look to some of the projects that we're running, the Clock House on one side in the harbour and the Green Campus in the other side. They may well be seeds that sow or lead us into or lead us into another direction. So, this is something that I don't think we're going to have to rush over. We can't rush over it because there isn't any instant fix. But I think what Mike said about trying to make it sustainable and at least cover its costs needs to be our baseline, really. And then hopefully some of the LUF money and some of the stuff that's going on with the LUF might just sow the seeds of other people wanting to be. I walk past the port sometimes and harbour twice a day, and already I can see changes have been made due to your team and the new harbour master. It's been tidied up, stuff's been moved around. It's already got a degree of mixed use because we see the sea cadets there. We obviously see lorries there. I know there's other businesses on there, so it's already got a bit of a mixed use feel about it anyway. So maybe we're pushing an open door, and the Green Campus will help us move further forward.
Councillor Green.
We're straying into items for another day. You've got a proposal. You've got a proposal. I'd like to second that proposal, and that we move on.
Yes. We will. So I won't go through the recommendations. They're all there in front of you on the report. So recommendations are number one. Do we all agree with number one? That we note the report. Number two is that we move on from. Are you all looking at those recommendations? Yeah? Okay. So recommendation number two. Are we all agree with that one? Okay. And recommendation three. Do we all agree with that one? Okay. So we all agree. Okay. Yeah, that's proposed by Councillor Scobie and seconded by Councillor Green, and everybody agrees. Thanks, Mike. I think we all should give thanks to our officers because it's been a long process, and he's pulled all his hair out. Item number 7, the Pathfinder Programme funding reallocation. I call on Ms Askew to present the report.
Thank you. And my report's not as long as the former report, but sorry, it's not a short one. So following on from the future delivery update report on the Port of Ramsgate from the Director of Environment, this report relates to the reallocation of the levelling up funds that were allocated to the port infrastructure project. The report I'm presenting this evening is going to Cabinet next week, and includes information required to make a decision on the reallocation of the funding from the port infrastructure project to other schemes within the Pathfinder programme in Ramsgate. As the accountable body for the projects within the Simplification Pathfinder pilot, the Council is the ultimate decision maker. We have been engaging with the Pathfinder team at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and they are aware of the reallocation of funding and the Council's request for an extension to the timescales into the 2026-27 financial year. They are supportive of this request, and we are working with them to finalise that. We have also engaged with the Thanet Regeneration Partnership Board as set out in the Pathfinder programme's governance arrangements. The board expressed regret that the port infrastructure project could no longer be taken forward using Pathfinder funding, but the board also accepted the proposed recommendations for the funds to be reallocated to other projects within the Ramsgate Pathfinder programme. The report outlines the challenges that not only Thanet District Council has had in delivering the projects within these funding programmes, but that are being seen nationally. Through the period of time since award in developing the projects, including the engagement of professional teams, significant levels of inflation have risen. Alongside other challenges, this has adversely affected the design and extended project timescales. We have been through a process of design, costing those designs, value engineering, and then redesign. This adds time and cost to the projects. As indicated in previous reports and updates, this has provided a challenge to delivery, and the Council was in a position where it would need to make more difficult decisions on specific elements in relation to some of the projects it's delivering. The position we find ourselves in relation to the reallocation of funding from the port project provides the delivery team with the opportunity to deal with increased costs and to reverse some of the value engineering that has happened within the rest of the programme. This funding will ensure that in reversing some of the value engineering, we can reduce the impact on quality and be in a position where we are able to deal with any changes that arise and add value by improving maintainability and I can't even get my words out. The function of the buildings, sorry. The approval of this reallocation will allow the team to press go on delivery for some of the schemes quickly. This includes mobilising works on both Broad Street and Clock House within the next month. The reallocation of the funding is 2 million to the Green Campus, 1.7 million to the Clock House, 2 million to harbour placemaking, which includes Pier Yard and the Highway Scheme, 585,000 to Broad Street, 100,000 to the fishing facilities, and the remaining just over 1.2 million will sit in a contingency fund. The contingency will be programme-wide and will help deal with the unknowns that may impact on the schemes as we go into construction. Each project has its own contingency, but this provides some mitigation for the Council. Should the funding not be required for any of the projects, there are elements of added value that could be considered across the programme, which will be considered within this financial year. The panel is invited to consider this report and make any recommendations to Cabinet they consider necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Members, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I like the term value engineering. I think it means cost overrun, doesn't it? Generally speaking, I welcome what's happened. I think all the other projects in the Ramsgate schemes were having cost overrun problems that meant that they had to be value engineered. And I think this money will make them better projects that we can be proud of in Ramsgate, rather than, they're struggling for money. I would like to say something about the Pier Yard and the highways works. I understand they're coming to planning shortly. I have concerns about what's happened to them when they've run up against pressures like providing parking and access. I just hope they haven't been watered down, engineered, etc. And I want to ask that whatever the plans end up as, that there's another round of public consultation about them. Could officers agree to that?
Thank you. So we are planning on bringing back to a councillors' briefing the highway scheme and pier yard. The highway scheme has been through a full Section 278 consultation, and as the plans currently stand, we're not changing those designs because it's a process that we would need to go back through from the beginning with KCC to get their approval. So our plan is not to change the designs within the highway scheme. In terms of pier yard, we can take back and have a look at the options within the programme timeframes to do some engagement. What we have done is used all of the information from the 2 engagement events that we have run in Ramsgate on the programme to feed into the designs alongside, as you say, things around parking, access for harbour users and the commercial quay and East Pier. So I will talk to the delivery team about whether there's an opportunity to do some further engagement on pier yard before it goes into planning, but obviously the planning process will come to a committee, and we will use the design review panel that we've set up that has many experts to look at that as well.
I'd rather you just said yes.
Councillor Wing.
Yeah, thank you. We're finally getting there, aren't we? We start seeing bricks going up and things changing, which is really good. I just wanted to, I mean, this spend of money and the scope of employment opportunities that are going to be created as a consequence. So I'm looking at the not the actual projects themselves, but their ability to deliver side benefits, social benefits. One of the things I know we on the youth strategy group that we were on, and we know youth unemployment and unemployment locally is really bad, but how are these projects going to be structured in a way so that they can benefit our local needs, kids not in education, employment or training? Will we be not necessarily prioritising against other providers, but will they be have an impact on local employment opportunities, particularly for our young, training and apprenticeship opportunities as well? So are we working with some of the local providers to ensure that all of these projects has a social impact and an employment impact, given huge amounts of money? I mean, I'd be really upset if we were bringing loads of people in from out of area to build these things. It would seem upsetting, and very often you see projects with big symbols, particularly in London, powered by local people, powered by, you know, promoting local employment, which would be a really good thing to see this money actually have a direct impact on our young people in particular.
Thank you. When you talk about the job creation, are you talking about when they're built, or in the build, or both?
I think in the construction period,
okay,
and also in the final period. I mean, the construction period, we're probably going to see many more opportunities, but you know, this will provide training opportunities as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we've got 2 contractors at the moment, so Wilmot Dixon on the biggest schemes in Ramsgate, and then a company called SER working on Newington, and we are working with both of their social value officers, for want of a better job title, to look at the things that they need to deliver as part of their contract. Obviously, the Newington one is relatively small, but they're working alongside the Newington Community Association on the added value they can provide there. And then in terms of Wilmot Dixon, they have a programme, and they've actually worked with East Kent College Group previously on another scheme, I think in Sheppey, or in that direction, where they run a series of opportunities of kind of training and being able to get young people so that they could, should there be a job, be able to access it. So it includes work experience and training and things like that. And it's worked really well. And they have a massive long list of all the things that you can choose from a social value point of view, see up to a certain amount of money. But actually we chose to focus on the things that would help support young people in that way. So we have linked them up with our community development manager, who has vast experience of working with not-for-profit groups in Ramsgate, across the district, but also the college on different programmes to support young people into work. Just going into the bit around jobs when these are constructed and they're running as different buildings, we obviously still need to make the decision around who's going to run those assets, whether it's the council or a third party, and what that process is. And we are due to bring a report by the autumn on that. One of the things that we're fortunate is, particularly for Ramsgate, is the Plan for Neighbourhoods programme, because what that does bring is some revenue funding. And if there are opportunities of running programmes of training to support young people to getting into specific sectors, that is something that potentially could be looked at as part of the engagement and the work that we're doing to develop a vision and regeneration plan for Ramsgate. But there are lots of examples that have been funded through UK Shared Prosperity Fund, where we have worked with sector specialists and they have run projects and opportunities to take people from NEET and to find them jobs and do training in between. It is intensive and it tends to cost more money, which is why it's hard. But actually, we've got that perfect storm of assets coming forward in sectors that could grow, have growth opportunities, and some funding and a programme that could link some of those things together. So I think it's even more exciting having those two things at the same time.
But can we make sure our comms team make sure that this added value time stuff is really well reported, and it's always great to read some one-off stories of people who've passed through and qualified in something or actually working on a building.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, we're bringing an update report to Cabinet in July on all of the Pathfinder programme. So I think it's something we can pick up in that.
Councillor Faruqi.
Thanks so much. May I just ask, in audit terms, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about the size of the unallocated contingency as a proportion of the whole programme. And my understanding is that all this funding has to be put against a deliverable objective, otherwise it could potentially be returned to the funder. Is there any reason, given that each project has its own contingency built in, that we didn't allocate that contingency across projects? So my understanding is that there is some flexibility between them.
Yeah, there is flexibility between them, but I think Cabinet, in discussion in putting the report together, we wanted to have some clear parameters for the projects. And so if we said, well, we'll put it against that project, but we might not need it, then we would have to come back through another process of cabinet approvals to be able to move all of that money. Whereas having some of that flexibility with having a contingency, and one of the things that we are doing in funding bids, or even in developing proposals for projects, is we are having construction contingency, and then we are adding project contingency as a separate set of contingency, because there's so many unknowns and there are so many challenges around inflation and when you get into the ground, quite often with construction projects, you've put 10% contingency on it, and it's not enough. Some civil engineering projects have 50% contingency attached to them and will quite often move into that amount of money. So to hold some funding that may or may not be needed in the contingency allows us by the end of this financial year to know whether we're going to need it, and then it can be, as I said, reallocated from a value added point of view, and that will come through a decision notice. Anyway, I mean, I didn't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Really hear your points there around the concerns of not spending the money and not being allocated. What that needs to be balanced against is the potential for any overspends and us getting sufficiently far with any projects. If we'd allocated all the money without a central contingency, we'd then be looking at a situation where we might need TDC money to complete these projects, and I've been very clear from the outset, and I know Cabinet have as well, that's not the situation we're going to get ourselves into. And Louise and the team, they're dealing with really complex projects. With, one of them is a grade 2-star listed building. There's going to be issues when we start dealing with that building. So I'm very confident that contingency will be allocated. It's held centrally at the moment, and we can monitor that as those projects progress.
Anybody else? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Louise. I suppose I'm probably going to ask something similar to what I asked at the members' briefing, which is about information for residents and the plan to make sure it links with what Becky said about comms. How are we going to make sure that people know what's going on? How can we reassure them that although some of the timescales have slipped, everything is fine and is moving forward, etc.? And how are we going to make sure that that information isn't just online, but is actually up on signs in front of buildings or in the places that people are looking to see change and haven't yet seen it and are really, really keen to see it happening?
Yeah, thank you. So the team at the moment are looking at what to put on the hoardings around the Clock House, which is a really key site and quite central. So it won't just cover what's happening at the Clock House, but we'll have a nod to other projects. So that's something that we're looking at. We will also do the same at Broad Street, although some of that has less footfall. As I said, we will be providing an update report in July to Cabinet, and from that we shall be doing specific newsletters, and I appreciate it's online, but we have a database for both Ramsgate and Margate where people have signed up for further information, so we will use that as well as the wave to put more information out, and it will provide a good tool for councillors to be able to share that as well with residents.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again, Louise. If I were to start on the list of questions I've got, it wouldn't go down well this evening because we'd run out of time. So I will attempt to be concise. You see, we have a good spirit in this committee. We have a damn good spirit in this committee. Behave. I do have some questions though. With regard to the reallocation of the money, because it had been wired across to the port isn't happening, the parrot is dead, now the money's coming back. How is it being reallocated? Where's the business plans and the justification for how that has been split? Because there's £2 million going into the green, inverted commas, campus, and I can't see where you've got any outcome on that other than a shed with solar panels, because there is no business to go in there, which raises the question, how has it got to REBA stage 3, which revolves around internal configuration and making things fit for the intended purpose? If there's no users, we don't know what that purpose is. So how the hell are we ploughing down and putting £2 million into that while offering the dripping of 100,000 to fishermen, which has been previously described in this chamber this year as a declining industry? I'm here to confirm that from 8 vessels at the start of the year, 5 more have started, including 2 that have grown organically from the existing fleet. That is not an industry in decline, that is growth industry. Those jobs need to be supported, and that's exactly what levelling up was for. But 100 grand drippings while chucking 2 million at a project with no viable or visible business plan makes absolutely no sense. So I wonder if we could justify how those revisions have been calculated to put them back in. Will that be reassessed with the evidence to hand so we can provide the fishing fleet with the support it actually needs, which I'm pleased to say still comes in at less than $1 million, even if they get what they want. They were promised 3.2 million originally, and the Labour government have now suggested they're going to put 361 million into the small inshore fleet in addition to that nationally. So if they're putting 361 million in nationally, why aren't we supporting it out of this money that was originally predicated for it? So I think there's still a very long discussion to be had with proper consultation with stakeholders as to exactly how this develops and to make sure that best value is given to the community, because it's absolutely vital. The other thing I'd like to ask is the 1.7 million going back into the clock tower going to put the lift back in, because that disabled access is going to be really important to its designation as a museum, whoever is operating it, and to cut off the top half of the building by not providing modern facilities for equal access for all would seem to be ludicrous to me if we're chucking another 1.7 million at it, because lifts aren't cheap, but they're in £1 million. So, a few questions in there. I'll call it at that for the minute, because as I say, I think, you know, I don't want to overload, but thank you.
Thank you. So the way that the allocations have been made are are based on cost reports. So we have been working through the REBA stages, we have cost reports, and that has identified where the challenges are, and that is what you would normally use in a construction project in terms of valuing the cost of construction. We have a contractor on board, so they're not just cost reports based on desk exercises, they are based on construction figures, which is how we've identified the allocations within the programme. There's quite a lot to unpick on the Green Campus project from what you've said, but we are using data from the market engagement that we did around the Green Campus, and we had quite a lot of interest and information through that process. We are also using engagement that we did when we held a green event down at the Sea Cadets through the UK Share Prosperity Fund, and actually we had a number of green/maritime businesses interested in space at the Green Campus, some of whom we are continuing to work with, so that's really exciting, because I think there's quite a lot of opportunity there for growth and employment in Ramsgate. The Green Campus is particularly about a step change in economic opportunities in Ramsgate, so growing a sector that we know is growing internationally and taking the advantage and opportunity that we've got from having multinational wind farm operators down in Ramsgate. So that's kind of where we're working to at the moment. As I said, there will be a report coming in the autumn in terms of the suggestion of how, or for approval, on how we will take forward the operational management of that building. But it is based on evidence and working with the sector. In terms of the fishing facility, I think we've talked a lot about it in the chamber. We've had a number of reports that outlined the challenges, the fact that the fishing fleet wouldn't accept the cost in terms of the maintenance and managing the facility, the fact that they couldn't sign up to deliver the job outputs that were required as part of the facility being delivered, and we'd had some conversations with them about potentially looking for funding to help them with apprenticeships. And there, I think you said there was 8 at the beginning of the year. I think at one point there were 6, and I understand that some of the new boats in the harbour are transient, depending on what is available for fishing. The challenge is it isn't a growing industry to the value and volume that that the green industries are, and it won't create the jobs that we need to make that step change for our young people, particularly when we've got the highest levels of unemployment in the southeast of our young people, and we need to find different industries, which is what we've been doing in the port, in diversifying what is down there, and we need to continue to do that to be able to make sure that we've got that growth opportunity there. I think we have added the 100,000 into the pot for the fishing facilities to be able to provide them something that goes some way to deliver what they have asked for in a relatively cost-effective and low-maintenance facility, because we don't want to overburden the fleet there with costs if they're unable to manage that. There are also costs in there around water and electricity to make sure that they've got those facilities that they need. In relation to the clock house and the lifts, the challenge was that they formed part of a new extension, which was not something that either National Lottery Heritage Fund or Historic England particularly wanted to see on that building, and we would need 2 lifts, one at either end, because there are steps within that first floor. I appreciate that accessibility is really important, and we will work with whoever runs the facility to be able to make sure that we've got the right level of artefacts and information on the ground floor. This funding allocation also allows us to fit it out to a degree. So if we are working with a not-for-profit organisation to run the facility, then at least they don't need to bring that funding to help with some of the fit-out, and that's where some of that reallocation has come from. Not doing the lifts now doesn't mean that we couldn't do them in the future, and we are building up our engagement with Arts Council England, who are the national organisation in terms of funding and support for museums, and we are working with them, looking at our whole portfolio of museums to see where all the opportunities lie in terms of managing artefacts, working with volunteers, and looking at future capital funding projects.
Thanks, Louise. Some interesting answers there. I'm pleased to hear what you say about the viability of the clock house, because obviously that museum has to be made. In terms of its operating costs, because I know that particularly one of those organisations quite keen to man it, would need obviously revenue in order to, because it doesn't matter, you can run something with the greatest goodwill in the world. The tunnels project runs on volunteers basically, with a few people running it. But it obviously has operating costs, insurance, utilities and that sort of thing, which I'm presuming that the cafe will be part of the clock tower arrangement, so that the revenue from that enables a not-for-profit operator to actually cover the running costs. Am I right? And is there a plan to show that that makes it viable? Because that's also very important, because otherwise we could go half-cocked on it. Personally, knowing the area down there, I think it needs that, and it would create a revenue stream, even if it was only a basic revenue stream, to enable the place to function and wipe its face on its day-to-days. With regard to the fishing fleet, I'd come back and say to you, you're absolutely right, because vessels by definition are transient, but those vessels, I can assure you, are based here on a permanent basis currently, and with the fishing conditions and the way that the fishing is, they will be operating from here for a while. But at least 2 of those have grown from the existing fleet, and staff off of those existing vessels have then been encouraged and sufficiently confident enough to go and get their own vessels. That is organic local growth, and should give grounds in order to give better consideration to what they need. I do think that we've suffered from, let's just say, faltering communications at times between the various bodies and individuals concerned. I'm really pleased to see what you're saying about the council working with, for instance, the Newington Community Association, because it shows it can be done, and it should be that community groups are included in the process. So can we please, as well as it happening on Newington, now, which funnily enough hasn't had all the cost implications of every other project, so Newington must have an anti-inflation bubble or something around it, but the rest of them have all got massively increased costs. Can we please get some transparency and engage with the stakeholders so that what comes through from this revision becomes deliverable? Because we're 3 or 4 years into this, and for me, I don't see an awful lot having moved forward apart unless it was up at Newington or told us what we already know about ports. Because we, as I said, we can have all the pretty reports and kind words, butter, no parsnips. And whatever Dover or anyone else says, none of them have come here with the cash and said, we'll make it happen. So let's move on. This money gets readdressed to the projects, but can we please make sure, robustly, that it gets via to where it's needed, not to where it sounds nice? Because we've mentioned the Green Campus, which was called a campus because it was supposed to be a research centre. London Array in particular, and I'm happy to name them, because I was part of a group that worked with some of their senior management, were very keen to see a research and development centre down there based on mining the data from the 10 years of operation in order to get a more circular economy. This was supported by, and there were working groups on this that worked with them, that was supported by UCL, it was supported by the Kent universities, there was a lot of work, and that could have come to fruition on there. Are you still discussing that type of project with the wind farm operators? Because if you're not, then maybe we should be, because otherwise all the research stuff is going to go off to Teesside and so on, and all the job opportunities, and we need them here. And because we do not have the physical size to become a manufacturing plant in the green industry, because we just don't have the dockside, what we could be is a real centre of excellence and with real opportunity, but on the research and development side of it, which again, I know that the global players in this were very keen, and they were keen to come here, but suddenly it's all evaporated. Is there any chance of you coming that through? Because also some of those who are involved with that would be very happy to collaborate with the council to bring it back online, because, so again, the need for discussion, communication and community involvement. When I'm talking about community involvement, I'm not talking about going down, you know, and chatting to people that are just wandering about shopping. I'm talking about notable business people that are in the community.
If she wants to come back.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, the cafe does form part of the sustainability for the Clock House. We run a number of museums, so we know roughly the income and outgoings for those, so that is all formed in part of that data. I mean, we can go back and forth on the fishing fleet. It's challenging because we've had many a meeting with the fleet who were unable to create jobs and unable to maintain the facility, and I can't change that position, but it led to cabinet reports and formal decisions made, which is where we are now. And if it has grown to I can't remember what you said, 12, 13, that's great, having 13 boats, and this facility should be big enough to deal with what those 13 boats bring in, and if there are future options for that 360 million, as you mentioned, then I think there's an opportunity there for either the fleet or the council to be looking at that funding when it's when we know more information about it. Newington has had challenges with cost. We've allocated funding to that through decisions with from Cabinet to make sure that we can deal with that inflationary pressure and some of the other challenges we've identified on the way. The Green Campus was never specifically a research centre. It was about a mixed-use site that provided some training space and education space alongside working spaces. London Array at the time, when we spoke to them, when we submitted the bid, have changed dramatically. They're a whole different company with different senior managers. residents, and their position is quite different from the one that was before. We've also engaged with all of the Kent universities that have a specialism in this, and education providers, and whilst they are all really interested, none of them want to run it as a hub for their facilities. So it's about how do we engage them with that site, with the businesses, and perhaps set up some programs of activity that make more sense. But we're not like some of our European partners where the universities take the lead and run these types of facilities. So we are working them, and we will continue to do so in making sure that the facilities that are provided, there is an opportunity for things like launchpad of new businesses and enterprise to be able to start within the facility. I think I've covered everything.
Councillor Bright, you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Louise, for your report. And I just wanted to say that I do absolutely approve of the recommendation to reallocate the fund from the port project to these other projects, which I see as really exciting. And it's all about best value for money, and it's about long-term job creation. So I think if you are thinking about what you can promote on the hoardings, I think say how many jobs it's going to provide. I think that's essentially that's what people are going to be excited about. Thank you.
Councillor Wing.
So I just wanted to say in relation to the clock house that there's already been a massive amount of work undertaken by Rob and his team to actually catalogue every single item, every cannonball, every flag, every little model ship. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer time that the project has already created an outcome. Everything's been catalogued by somebody who's in the top of his game, and all that stuff is now wrapped up, catalogued and in storage somewhere, ready to come back out for people to see in the newly refurbished museum. So it isn't that things have not happened, particularly with the clock house. I think there were 70 volunteers registered to take part in that. So it created this massive groundswell of interest in our heritage, particularly our maritime heritage. So we mustn't just look at the physical buildings themselves. There's already been a massive impact on people. And I know one of the volunteers found that their mental health and well-being improved as a consequence of being involved in that project. So we've already got massive outcomes. So well done.
Anybody else? Okay, so I want to refer back to the email that I referred to earlier, Louise, and there was a couple of issues that they brought up concerning the Green Campus and the Clock House, but you have addressed those concerns. And all that the Ramsgate Regeneration Alliance are saying is that they're happy to offer any assistance that can bring benefit to Thanet generally and Ramsgate in particular. That's all they want to say at this point. So.
Chair, can I ask who are the Ramsgate Regeneration Alliance?
I don't know, I presume there was somebody that John probably knows they are. I don't know they are.
It's a non-political group of consisting of all sorts of people, from lawyers to professionals, that were brought together originally on a non-political basis by Craig McKinley to work in the community to augment and supplement projects and so on. And it includes such notables as a former LGA vice chair who's resident in Ramsgate, various main board members of big companies and so on. And it's a think tank of people people with notable ability that collaborate together for the benefit of the town, and they work along with the Civic Society, the Ramsgate Society and so on a research basis. So that's who they are, and as I say, it's they're very useful in very useful and very keen to collaborate, as for instance civic societies are in delivering for the community. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of the membership of them. So it's nothing sinister, it's nothing attacking. It's something that's been around since 2015, and in fact I thought you'd even been to meetings, but we used to meet regularly in the yacht club, but the pandemic sort of killed off a lot of the physical side of it. So hopefully that answers everyone's questions. In fact, I know, David, you've been to some of our meetings, and certainly Tricia and co. Did you not? No. But I do know that Tricia and Becky and co. So it's nothing sinister. It's a group of local residents, professional residents, that have got together by invitation of the former MP to just try and look at things as a think tank and improve the situation.
Okay, right. So we're asked to look at and endorse the recommendations that are in front of you. If we want to have a look at those, and if we're all happy, do I have a proposer for those recommendations? Councillor Scobie's proposing them, and a seconder, Councillor Austin. Do we all agree? Excellent. Thank you, Louise. And again, I'll express all our thanks to the work that you're putting in on this, because it's a tremendous amount of work. I wouldn't even know where to start. Okay, moving on to item 8, the forward plan and exec cabinet reports lists. Unless there's something that the panel wishes to discuss from the plan, we're asked to note the report. Councillor Austin.
I just also wanted to, change our normal pattern, because we always just go over this item, and I thought, people really wanted an extra 5 minutes here rather than going home to their families or down to the pub. I just wanted to point out that we actually have an item in the forward plan for next month, undertaking external and internal decoration to maintain the Royal Harbour car park in good order, which is extremely welcome, and we're absolutely delighted to see that item. But it is now 2.5 years, I think, since the lifts have been out of order. I have an email in my inbox, email correspondence with former Councillor David Saunders, who at that stage was the cabinet member responsible, saying he would ensure that it happened quickly. So could we say we're really, really pleased to see that this is happening, but could we also urge that we get some information round to councillors about what's happening with the lifts, please? I write out at intervals, I get told it's happening soon at intervals, and it still hasn't happened. 2.5 years.
That will be on our agenda for the 15th of July.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay, that concludes the business for tonight's meeting. I declare this meeting closed at 8:42. Thank you, members.
And Tinkerbell won't die, presumably.